fuzzy feed in terms of verbal stuff from the rabbi? Because I find when Peter's talking, it's clear, but when the rabbi's talking, it's got buzz around it. Nobody?
Okay. Well, welcome back, everyone, to Parsha Insights. We're up to Parsha Yisro, which is a very exciting place to be. So we're going to go on a little bit of a journey today. I'm going to try to move at a pretty good clip because we have a lot of material to cover. Okay, but it'll be exciting, and we'll get in on time, we'll get out on time, and now here we go. Parsha Insights. Okay. We're starting with the Gemara in Bava Batra. We're jumping right in, the title being Ultimate Clarity, again, according to the teachings of the great Rav Moshe Shapiro. The Gemara in Bava Batra says the following, Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Zina Chada Havaka Zina Bamidbara Vitluya Bahadan Hautaya. So they was traveling in the desert, were accompanied by a certain Arab who would, and tell a number of stories. The Talmud tells a number of stories by speaking of the Arab, the person with the local knowledge, with the deep local history and knowledge. And he could take the dust and smell it and say, this is the road to such and such a place. This is the road to such and such a place. They would say, how far are we from water? He would say, bring me dust. We brought it to him. And he said, we are 8 parasangs. We're that far. The Aramaic word is parse. We are that far away from water. Okay, so he has this ability, this amazing ability to determine how far we are from something based on smelling and taking, holding the dust. And a second time, okay, I switched the type of dust to test him, but I couldn't confuse him because he was an expert in the matter. That's just a little bit of a preamble, just to get us into where we are, because the Talmud tells a few of the aspects of the conversation between Rabba Bar Chana, who's the sage, and this particular local native. Amar li, he said to me, Ta'ach velach har Sinai. I'm going to show you Mount Sinai. I went and I saw that scorpions were encircling it, and they were standing as high as white donkeys. Okay, very clear vision, right? This is, I think we all understand. What does this mean? Anyone? I don't know either. But there's scorpions that are as big as white donkeys. And we're going to, basically, our journey today is going to be to try to get an insight into what exactly this is talking about. And Shamati Bat Kol, I heard as I was standing at Mount Sinai, I heard a heavenly voice, Shomeret, Oili Shenishbati V'achshav Shenishbati Mi Meferli. Oh, woe is to me that I took an oath. Now I took the oath. Who will nullify it to me? And the commentary of Steinsaltz on the Talmud, which I quoted here, where he kind of fills in some of the blanks. He says, Oy li shenishbati, woe unto me that I take an oath, lahaglot et Yisrael, to exile Israel. Oy vey, God says, I have made a commitment to exile Israel, v'achshav shenishbati mi meferli, and now that I have taken the oath, who is going to nullify it? Who will nullify it for me? Okay, so what I want to take away from this, not the voice, we'll park for another time. We'll talk about what the voice actually means. But he comes to Mount Sinai and he sees scorpions that are like white donkeys. Chazai dahadrale, that encircling it are akraba, are scorpions. The kayama, who are standing as chamre tichamare chavarti, like white donkeys. What is this? Scorpions as big as white donkeys. Okay, let's go. Ready? Good. Okay. The perception of Moshe Shapiro says of Mount Sinai, the place of the giving of the Torah is as a place from which we are distant, and what prevents our return to it. So standing around it, almost protecting it, are great white scorpions the size of donkeys. Obviously, the illusion is exceedingly astounding and remote. What is the underlying concept of scorpions as large as donkeys and white in particular? What does this mean? Okay, ready? So let's talk about what Mount Sinai means, because there's special concepts that have to do with Mount Sinai, and those concepts have to do with memory. but in a very unique and specific way. As the verse says, Raki shamer lacha v'shmor nafshecha ma'od. You have to take care, guard yourself. Pen tishkach et hadvarim asher ra'u einecha, lest you forget what you saw. Upen yasuru milvavcha kol yemei chayecha, and lest you stray all the days of your life. Ahodatim levanecha v'livnei vanecha, and you shall teach your children and your grandchildren. Yom asher amarata lifnei Hashem Elokecha b'Choreb, the day that you stood before God at Mount Sinai at Horeb. Ve'emor Hashem elai hakeli et ha'am v'ashmi'em et dvarai. When God said to me, Moshe says, gather. God said, gather the people and let them hear my words. Asher yumudum li'irauti. They're going to learn to fear me. Kol yomim asher im chaim al adma, for their whole lives. Ve'bneihem yelamedu, and they may teach their children the same thing. So we are told, Hishamer lecha, preserve, guard yourself. Ushmor nafshecha, you have to be so careful lest you forget. What's with this emphasis on remembering? It's a very intense formula. And not only that, halacha takes it as a very specific requirement to remember Mount Sinai. And we're going to talk about what does it mean to remember something that I haven't experienced? How do I remember something that's someone else, that happened to someone else? Not me. What does it mean to remember for me? And furthermore, the Talmud in Menachot says anyone who forgets one thing from his studies violates a prohibition based on the verse that we just saw. Hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha ma'od. And this is accordance, and they break it apart that there are a few negative. There are two negative prohibitions. There's a positive prohibition, right? The language of the verse. I mean, if you forget something of the Torah, you violated a lot, right? They're showing the language that it says Hishamer lecha, take care, ushmor nafshecha, and watch yourself, lest you this. Like the language it goes again and again. And just tell me, remember. Why is it telling me in all these different ways that it's so important not to forget? So important. And furthermore, to say it in even more dramatic way, in Pirkei Avot, Rabbi Dostai ben Rabbi Yanai said in the name of Rabbi Meir, Kol hashocheach davar achad mimishnato, whoever forgets one word of what they're studying, ma'aleh alav hakatuv kilu mitchayev benafsho, taking as if he deserves capital punishment, as if he should. Your entire soul is connected with your ability to remember. Okay? And the Mishnah walks it back a little bit, makes it a little bit less severe, and says, we could be saying that even if it just happens, if you forget like people forget in life, the memory goes or whatever. No, it means it has to be an active act of forgetting. You have to remove it from your heart. You have to change your life in a way so that you won't remember. So it has to be kind of a purposeful removal of this knowledge from your heart. But either way, the commandment and the point is, hold on to it tightly. Hold on to Torah study tightly. And the significance of the prohibition, there's a commentary of Maimonides. So Maimonides has the Mishnah Torah, right? Maimonides writes what's known as the Yad HaChazakah, the 14 books of Mishnah Torah, which he enumerates all of the mitzvot. Maimonides also has something called the Sefer HaMitzvot, the Book of Mitzvot, a separate work, which is all of the mitzvot from 1 to 613. And there's a commentary of the Ramban, of Nachmanides, who criticizes or notes the things that Maimonides left out of his list of 613. And there's a further commentary of Megillat Esther, which is a very well-known commentary called the Megillat Esther, which defends Maimonides, and so on and so forth. It's a whole conversation. Once you put out a list, you're gonna, anything in life, you're gonna note what's missing from the list. So here, Nachmanides is attacking Maimonides and saying, why did you leave off this mitzvah? So Nachmanides says, The mitzvah that we have been, the second mitzvah that Maimonides forgot or didn't put onto the list is to never forget standing at Mount Sinai and never to remove this event from our consciousness. Rather, our eyes and our hearts should be directed there all of the days. It's as God said, be careful, guard your soul greatly, that verse that we just saw in the 4th chapter of Devarim. The intent of this commandment is of tremendous importance, for if the words of the Torah were to come to us only from the mouth of the prophet, then even if his prophecy was demonstrated to us truthful with signs and with wonders, and later point, he gives the justification for why it's so important, which is less important for us right now. And he says, and by the way, Maimonides already explained it in the Mishnah Torah. He talks about this. It's not like he doesn't know it doesn't exist. But why did he leave it out from the list of the 613 commandments? And this is a critical foundation of the Torah, Nachmanides says. And it's the prohibition that comes to us from the verse, lest you forget the things that your eyes saw. It's a warning, lest they leave your heart, so that you will not convey them to your children and their children through all generations. This is a critical mitzvah for the sake of the continuity of our tradition. Right? He talks a little bit before about the idea of the continuity of tradition is so important because it proves the authenticity of the tradition. It's not just that someone is showing up in any of our lives. Nachmanides says it's not like somebody. It's not like you have a Judaism salesman who knocks on your door and says, "I have a religion to sell you. Will you buy it?" And we buy it. That's not what it's about. Is that our religion is about the uninterrupted connection from generation to generation. And the reason I have faith is because my parents gave me this faith, because their parents gave. The reason I'm connected to Sinai is because I have this uninterrupted chain, which goes all the way back to Sinai, not because somebody told me about Sinai and I started to believe it. So why did Maimonides leave it off? So Nachmanides makes a very compelling point. Clearly,
the Rambam says something very interesting. He says, "Lo nasil midatenu."
Right.
And we've been saying "smor b'nafsenu." Usually, if you're going to listen, if you're going to remember something, you remember it with your mind, not with your heart.
Interesting.
And interesting that the Ramban says it. He says, "Lo nasil midatenu."
Right. Yeah. I don't know, and I know a lot's been written on this, on the place of the heart vis-a-vis the mind, in terms of what was the locus of thought in the ancient world. Our dichotomy of the heart is feeling and the mind is thought was not shared in the ancient world. So I don't know how to differentiate between that, but it's a good point to bring up. So Ramosha Shapiro says, clearly there's a distinctive concept of not forgetting the event of Mount Sinai, and the meaning is not to lose the level of clarity that we attained then when we saw and heard for ourselves. Such clarity transcends all other kinds of proof that aim at bringing doubt into our hearts. The event of Mount Sinai exists on a different plane. Its clarity unassailable. It has to be that way. And the great difficulty this presents is astounding. If the core of the commandment is to protect that degree of clarity, how is that possible? How can you protect clarity? The whole degree of clarity was for the generation who experienced it, not for us who didn't. And from then on, all we know is that we received it from our ancestors, and consequently it now enters the realm of proof and logic. It's not clear to me that as if I stood there at Mount Sinai. It's impossible. I didn't stand there. And so now it's involved in the realm, as he says, of proof and logic. And it's not a memory to me. So how do I square this? How do I understand it? How can I have a commandment to see Sinai clearly in my mind if that's impossible? Okay, everyone okay, cool with the question? Back to Nachmanides, back to the Ramban. The Ramban says, okay, the verse that we were discussing is a negative commandment which admonishes us severely. He says, for he stated that we should be careful concerning all the commandments and be heedful to perform the statutes and the ordinances. He saw his glory. Give me just a moment. He explained the reason that God made the revelation so you may learn to fear God. Therefore, do so and don't forget it. Thus, before mentioning the commandments which were proclaimed there on Mount Sinai, before actually going through all the commandments, he admonished with a negative commandment that we're not to forget a thing from the revelation, and we're never to remove it from our heart. So why? He further charged in the form of a positive commandment, so this negative commandment not to remove it, and then a positive commandment to pass it on from generation to generation. What's the benefit? The benefit is very great. For if the words of the Torah had come to us only through the mouth of Moshe, even though his prophecy was verified with signs and wonders, and were command us to do the opposite of what the Torah commanded us, then a doubt would enter, and so a false prophet comes, then we would have a doubt. But because we were there, because we have clarity, no one else can come and take that clarity away from us. Having a clarity of memory, of a vision of what happens, having firsthand experience, as it were, means that nothing can dissuade us from that experience and can tell us that what we saw there was wrong. And so to see, I don't want to go through word for word because we do have a little bit of room of path, a journey to travel. So he says the words of the Ramban are difficult to understand. I'm sorry. I just want to go back to something. Give me a moment. Okay, I want to read the end of the Ramban. Since the Torah reaches us from the mouth of the Almighty to our ears, and our eyes behold that there is no intermediary, we will reject anyone who differs and who casts doubt, and will declare him to be false. No sign will help him, nor will any wonder save him from deaths and falsehoods. Right? We shall transmit the matter to our children. They will know that the thing was true. Here's the key line. That when we transmit to our children, they will know that the thing is true, without doubt, as if all the generations had seen it. For we would not testify falsely to our children to cause them to inherit vanity and things wherein there is no profit, and they will not doubt at all the testimony we will give them. So what the Ramban Maimonides is saying is part of the proof, and what the Torah is telling us is that a parent has to teach it to a child. And by virtue of a parent teaching it to a child, the child will know that it's true. And how do we know that? Because parents don't lie to children. Rav Moshe Shapiro, Becky, I see her shaking your head, and Rav Moshe.
There are some children who will not accept it. That's not true. You can teach as much as you want. There are kids who will say, I don't believe. What are you going to do with that?
There are a number of different challenges here. One is that some children won't believe. The other is that some parents will lie. Right? What are you telling me? The proof that it's true is because a parent told it to their child. What? What do you mean? Ramban, Maimonides. Do you know parents? Do you know children? Do you know the stories we tell our children? Do you know what children are willing to believe from parents or not willing to believe from parents? The words of the Ramban are difficult to understand. That parents will not bear false testimony to their children or bequeath them nonsense of no avail is a matter of logic. Logic that most people in the world contradict. Most parents do the direct opposite. They educate their children in nonsense of no avail and guide them by it. And he's not just talking about the tooth fairy and Santa Claus. He's talking about bigger issues. Parents teach children nonsense, right? I think we can all agree that many parents teach their children nonsense. So why are you telling me that a parent teaching a child is a proof, is unassailable proof that there's truth to it? Where then is the transcendent proof? The whole commandment is to guard the powerful, unassailable clarity revealed at Sinai. We merely heard from our ancestors, and we rely on the logic that they wouldn't bequeath to us nonsense. And if someone would provide a sign or a wonder and say things contrary to the Torah, would we truly rely on the logical accuracy of our parents' testimony? You get it? If your parents tell you one thing, and then somebody else tells you another, do you not believe the other person because the logic is that my parents would never lie to me? And if so, how strong is that logic? That's pretty weak logic. That's very weak logic. Can it have such a degree of clarity that none can cause us to doubt it? Do what parents tell their children, is that locked in with absolute truth? No. What's more, fact contradicts such clarity. If the clarity of Mount Sinai is as definite as the Torah states, then why are there so many deniers? How can the commandment which presumes the utter certainty of the event of Mount Sinai coincide with reality. The existence of deniers proves that the chain from parent to child does not retain the absolute clarity of the event. So we're going back to our question. We're circling back to our question. How do we get that clarity? How can I be commanded to remember Mount Sinai? And if, according to Maimonides, you want to tell me it's because my parents taught me, well, come on. I can't be commanded to remember with clarity an event that my parents told me about. Maybe my parents were lying to me. Maybe I didn't believe it. But there's no clarity there. So again, we come back to our question, how can we be commanded to remember Sinai? I think it's a very, very powerful question. It's a very good question. How can we be commanded to remember Sinai? We weren't there. We didn't experience it. And our parents told us about it. Shkayach, our parents told us about it. Maybe it was true, maybe it's not. I don't know. So how can we be commanded? Okay, any thoughts or questions before we take a few more steps forward?
I heard that all the Jewish souls that ever were at Sinai.
There is a tradition, there is a Zohar, which talks about all of the souls that ever existed being at Mount Sinai. There is one of the early Jewish dating websites was called Saw You at Sinai. We were there together. We were all there, back there together. There's a tradition. It's a mystical tradition. That's not in the Torah. It's not that's on a whole different level. And then there's the question about the souls of the converts, which is a separate conversation if they were there or not. Okay. Maimonides, in his Igeret Teman, in which he gives hizuk to the oppressed people who are living in Yemen. And he gives them a sense of strength, and he says it's manifest that a person who spurns the religion that was revealed at that theophany is not an offspring of the folk who witnessed it. This is Maimonides saying, if you do not keep the Torah, then you are clearly not a descendant of somebody who was at Sinai. Right? It's a very dramatic claim, because if somebody was at Sinai, they would have carried it forward from generation to generation, and therefore that you wouldn't spurn the Torah. For our sages of blessed memory have insisted that they who entertain scruples concerning the divine message are not scions of those who were present on Sinai. I feel like the Hebrew is even easier than the English here. Kol hamistapek b'nevuah. The word mistapek comes from the word safek, doubt. Whoever has doubt or doubts the prophecy of the Torah, lo amdu avotav al har Sinai. Their ancestors did not stand at Sinai. There's something about that chain of continuity, says Maimonides, and we're going to challenge this. And the Radak, Rav David Kimchi, says further that those who leave our faith, lo hayu mizaram be'emet, were not descendants, direct descendants, elamina asafsuf hagarim sheikaru v'avon avot shamor lebanim harishayim. They were from the mixed multitude who were not at Sinai. Right? It's an amazing claim that Maimonides and the Radak are making. That those who,
4 sons.
Good. I'm glad you asked that. We're going to get to that. And Nachmanides says Nachmanides says it's possible. Oh, they were just about the Afsafsuf v'itachein. It's possible to separate it from their midst alone for those who were there, those who were there. It was given. It's just a little bit of background as to who this mixed multitude was. But either way, you're right. What about the 4 sons? What about one family having different results? The difficulty of this assertion is evident when we take into account that it's commonplace to find 2 brothers born of the same parents, yet one brother has complete faith that the Torah demands he would give up his life for it, and the other brother is a complete denier. How is it possible that only one brother's ancestors stood at Mount Sinai and not the other. Their lineage is identical, and for all Torah laws, they are certainly brothers. So how can you tell me that faith is a sign of continuity, of direct connection to Sinai? Lack of faith is a sign of not having that connection to Sinai. We're rejecting that idea. So we're back at square one, friends. How are we supposed to remember Sinai with such clarity? How is it supposed to stand in front of our eyes so that we remind ourselves and we teach our children if we weren't there? And the only way it's handed down to us is parent to child, which has its power, but is not an unassailable proof of its truth. Everyone on board with the question? Okay. So now we're talking about how Torah is transmitted. It must be clear and self-understood that when we ascribe to the event of Mount Sinai a degree of clarity unassailable by any doubt, it was not, heaven forbid, only for the generation who witnessed it. Its absolute clarity belongs to the very essence of Torah, which applies to all generations. And here he's going to say something profound, which is going to open up the entire picture for us. The giving of the Torah was indeed to the people of that generation, but its giving was in a manner that enables them to transmit its exact replica. When fathers transmit Torah to their children, say parents, it does not become a story, and the children now relate to an incident of the past. Rather, for the children, the transmittal of the Torah by their fathers is the giving of the Torah itself. The Torah is given in every generation. That's the model he's going to present. It's not like a story that's being told again and again and again, and after time it loses its impact, it loses its facts, it loses its relevance. Thus, the transmittal of Torah is not a means to pass on the Torah from generation to generation, but the very essence of the giving of the Torah itself. The Torah exists among the Jewish people in a manner that allows its exact replica to pass from generation to generation. Right? I want to read that last sentence again. The Torah exists among the Jewish people in a manner that allows its exact replica to pass from generation to generation. The Torah is not a story passed on from one generation to the next, but every generation gives the Torah to the next generation. That's the clarity that we have. It's not to remember 3,300 years ago when they stood at Sinai. It's to remember the moment in my own life when I received the Torah from my parents and from my teachers. That's the power. That's the clarity. And so much about what we do is replicating Mount Sinai. Just as the Talmud says, and you shall impart them to your children and your children's children, as it is written thereafter, the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Chorev. And just as below, when you're imparting it to your children's children, just as below, the revelation at Sinai was be'ema, or yira, uverita, uvertat, uvazea, that it was with reverence, fear, quaking, and trembling. So too, when the Torah is passed from generation to generation, it has to be done in that same reverence. What the Talmud is saying is that the teaching of Torah replicates the giving of the Torah at Sinai. It's a very powerful idea that on Shavuot, on any day, when we're listening to a Dvar Torah, when we're teaching each other, we're not just hearing something that was given at Sinai, but we're experiencing our own Mount Sinai. In this moment, we're experiencing our own Mount Sinai. This is a giving of the Torah. Every moment of Torah study is a giving of the Torah.
That's what we say on the Seder night. Chayav Adam lehera'ot et atzmo, not just lir'ot et atzmo.
Right, that's a debate in language and how to lir'ot atzmo or lir'ot atzmo. Maimonides, in his principles of faith, talks about in the ninth principle is faithful transmission of the Torah. Faithful transmission, I put literally facsimile because the Hebrew is he'etek. Sod HaHetek, it's called. The secret of the transmission, of the facsimile. Ki ha-Torah hazot muateket me'et haborei. The Torah has been transmitted faithfully from God and not from anyone else. And so it cannot be added to, it cannot be taken away from. As it is stated, you shall not add to it, you shall not take away from it. So this word, one recognize this word in Hebrew, he'etek, a copy, a facsimile.
Copy. Yeah, copy.
What, any other words you see in that?
Yeah, to move from one place, to take an exact replica and to move it to another place, lahatik.
Yeah, exactly. Any other words in there that are familiar? You know how you say the old in Hebrew?
Atik.
Atik is old in Hebrew. Atika.
Oh, Atika. Atika.
Exactly. So the idea of something that existed and then something else existed. I'm just going to mute people because I'm hearing a little bit of feedback here. Okay, here we go. So and the same concept. Vayatik misham hahara mikedem levetel. So moving, the idea of moving. So the Hebrew connotation of the word he'etek is reminiscent of the term yatek. He relocated and bears the same connotation. To relocate is to move an exact situation from one location to another. The verse in Genesis is discussing the relocation, the aspect of space. When Maimonides up here talks about the principle of the faithful transmission, it's referring to the aspect of time, of taking the same concepts that existed before and moving them to a different space in time, of taking that exact replica. That's the faith of the transmission. That's part of our faith. The Sod HaHetek. In other words, the transmittal of the Torah is not the telling of a story, but the exact replication of the event at Mount Sinai, including all that occurred in that place at the time. The ability to transmit the exact replica of the Torah is what passes from generation to generation. All other stories become impossible to replicate because they become stories of incidents that once happened, and parents relate them to their children. And understandably, they change with time. That's the nature of a story. Ever play the game telephone? Or stories, they change over time. We know that. But the event of Mount Sinai is not one of those stories because the mitzvah, the principle of faith, is that we transmit an exact replica from generation to generation, does not pass on as a story, heaven forbid. The event passes on because Torah, together with the event of its giving, is Torah itself. Part of the storytelling is the story. Very powerful. The Ramchal, in his Sefer HaVikuach, I think we're going to skip this for a moment. The Ramchal speaks about what was given, meaning the truths that were given at the time of the Torah. Wasn't just the law. Let me see. Aval kisharatza hakadosh baruch hu lahakriv elav u'matorah chaviva lo ma'od. When God wanted to bring His nation closer to Him, wanted to bring Israel closer to Him, Hine karat Hashanai opened up the heavens, v'gala lahem et hamastarim shelo, taught the secrets of existence. Ad sheyadu kulam v'nitbarer lahem be'emet, until everyone had a clear perspective, meaning the Torah was not given to us just to give us a series of laws to follow, but it was to give us a way of looking at the world with clarity and understanding what the world is really about. That's Mipnei Yisrael Zachul Lirot Kol Zeh Bahar Sinai. That's what Israel merited to see at Mount Sinai. Right? That's the principle of the Maharal in his Ma'amar Vikuach. And he said, this is what the event of Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah revealed. The Creator revealed to us existence itself and the essence of being. The event of Mount Sinai was not to introduce new insights, although understandably result, all kinds of new insights became evident. The fundamental point was to introduce a new starting point. Mount Sinai gave the Jewish people the foundation upon which how we view life was to move forward from there. A different awareness of self, a new perception of reality. It revealed the Creator as the root of existence, and therefore anyone who perceives himself as existing simultaneously perceives the Creator existence itself. God is the root of my life. God is the root of your life. This is what we understood at Mount Sinai. The Torah was almost, he's almost saying the Torah was like secondary to this. The actual laws were secondary to the understanding that we received at Sinai. And this is what we're remembering. We're remembering the core truth of our faith. That's what was given to us at Sinai. And that's what's transmitted. That's what's given over from generation to generation. That everyone, when they receive the Torah from the previous generation, receives that core understanding of existence itself, of the role of God in our lives, of the role of God as our Creator. That's what we're receiving. That's what we remember with such clarity. Clarity because it happened to me, because every generation experiences the revelation at Sinai. That's the clarity that I have, because my teachers didn't tell me about what happened thousands of years ago. My teachers told it to me, and I received it from them just as they received it from their teachers in real time. That event had significance. That event was a Ma'amad Har Sinai. If a person were to grow up among animals with no human contact, it would obviously be impossible for them to be human. And there have been sporadic episodes, which the sages also cite. To integrate such a person into human society takes an extremely long time. The reason for this is that a person's most basic awareness of themselves as a human being derived from the parents who raised them. Be they birth parents, foster parents, any other human being, the person perceives themselves in relation to those who bestow upon them the very first roots of knowledge, right? We see in our parents, we model how we will become by virtue of what we see in our parents. Consequently, all subsequent understanding builds on the initial awareness of self, which is received from parents. In other words, if not for what a child understands from parents or anyone like a parent, they could not perceive anything. When Ramban asserts, so he's giving us a different, remember when Maimonides said, parents don't lie to their children, or parents don't teach their children Baba Mises? What Rav Moshe Shapiro is going to reinterpret that is, it's not that they don't say Narishkeit to them. It's that the existence of parents teaches the child the fundamental essence of that child's life. By viewing parents, by viewing the humanity of parents, by viewing the createdness of parents, one understands about oneself, right? He said he doesn't mean that parents would never relate a falsehood or an incorrect story to their children. Rather, they're discussing a child's initial perceptions, the foundation of that, which is from the parents. What is perceived from parents is the truth of truths. It provides a person with the very awareness of one's own being, and therefore the root of all cognition. It defines how one perceives oneself, and consequently how one perceives all else. From our parents, we receive the essence of our humanity. We understand that we're human, and we understand through that Sinai event of transmitting knowledge and understanding from generation to generation that God is the creator of all, and that's a new revelation in each generation. Go back to Mount Sinai. We're almost there. Go back to Mount Sinai, Yom Asher, and here we're talking about the language of, when we talk about Sinai, we talk about Ma'amad Har Sinai. Anyone heard that, familiar with that phrase? Ma'amad Har Sinai. It means, I don't know, in yeshiva, we call it Maimonides Har Sinai. It's Ma'amad Har Sinai. What is the word Ma'amad? Standing. The word Amod. Yom Asher Amadeta Lifnei Hashem Elokecha. The day that you stood. This is the verse right after the verse we quoted before about not forgetting, about remembering. The day that you stood before God. And if you do this, another usage of the word amod doesn't only mean to stand, but it means to withstand, to bear. So Rav Moshe Shapiro says, We refer to the events surrounding the giving of the Torah as Ma'amad Har Sinai. The intent is not that they stood and didn't sit, although maybe that was true. But it's not about how they were physically situated. Rather, Ma'amad in the broader sense of the term means the ability to exist. It means that your awareness of existence was in the presence of God. For this reason, we use the phrase Ma'amad Har Sinai, the existence revealed at Sinai. Our very essence is connected to this experience at Sinai. And now we're talking about what happened to us there. And we're going to go on a little bit of a scientific journey, if you'll allow me. These are the last steps of our journey, are talking about receptivity and what we're doing at Sinai. And we're going to go back to where we started, to the story of Rabbi Bar Chana, who is blocked from entering Sinai by a scorpion the size of white donkeys. To approach Mount Sinai, Moshe Shapiro says, and receive the true form of existence requires one to be in the ultimate state of receptivity, opened and prepared to receive, and only to receive. One must shed any semblance of form and present oneself as unformed matter whose primary characteristic is the capacity and aspiration to receive all form. The embodiment of true unformed matter is a donkey, hamor, which derives from chomer, which means unformed matter, right? Absolute, we call gashmut, absolute matter, materialism, is the essence of chomriut, is the opposite of spirituality. It's an absolute fundamental physicality, true unformed matter, just mass. And likewise, the color white is the simplest of colors, prepared to receive any form, the first vestige of which is always black on white. White is the unformed matter upon which all colors apply. He's talking about the white donkey. The white donkey is the essence of receptivity. Anything can be imposed on it. It's there to receive. Once it becomes white is the unformed matter upon which all other colors apply their form. White is the foundation. Once it becomes impossible to differentiate between various colors, only their shared quality of unformed matter is visible. Only their common basis of white is discernible. What is he talking about? Once it becomes impossible to differentiate between different colors, what's he referring to? He's referring to the Newton disk, the disappearing color disk, which is where if you spin a disk like this, it appears, if you spin it at a sufficient speed, it'll appear to the naked eye as white. That's the Newton disk. When you remove the ability to distinguish unique colors, all you're left with is white. White is the foundation. White is the basis. White represents receptivity, the readiness to receive. That's the white donkey, is there, and put on it what you will. It will receive. Accordingly, the epitome of unformed matter and the power of receptivity in its greatest unparalleled form is a white donkey. For this reason, what must surround Mount Sinai, to which one can approach only as unformed matter with the full power of receptivity, because Mount Sinai is about receiving the message, are white donkeys. Great, fantastic. Wait a second. But it wasn't white donkeys. It was scorpions who were like white donkeys. It should have been white donkeys. But the symbolism, he's going very deep into the symbolism, is that it was scorpions. And the Vilna Gaon, and we actually spoke about this in an earlier session on Parasha Vayetze, when we're talking about the snakes and the scorpions that were in the pit, and the symbolism of the snakes and the scorpions, what that referred to in terms of what attacks the good, of what attacks faith. And he says that the scorpion is an attack against that which is fundamental. The word ba'ikar are the same, which means fundamental. Essence are the same letters as akrav, or scorpion. The scorpion's entire aim is to attack that which is fundamental. So see the Parasha Vayesha. Going back to Mount Sinai and to understand, so it should have been a white donkey, but it really was a scorpion, right? I quoted the wrong part of this, but it should have been the second half of this phrase, which was about Mount Sinai. In other words, the white donkeys surround Mount Sinai as they should, but they are scorpions. In direct opposition to the concept of white donkeys, the epitome of receptivity, the concept of scorpions is the epitome of non-receptivity. The scorpion is about rejection. They represent the denial of that which is fundamental. To transform white donkeys into scorpions is to take that immense power of receptivity, of standing there at Sinai and receiving the message from God, receiving that understanding, which is the foundation of our existence, and rejecting it, and converting it into the fundamental aspect. Instead of being a receiver, it considers itself fundamental, not receiving God's imprint on us, but rejecting that essence. Consequently, it resists any form of receptivity. We're going to skip that next sentence. Next paragraph. It relates to Mount Sinai. To relate to Mount Sinai, one must perceive it as fundamental. It is fundamental. God is fundamental. The understanding that I'm getting at Sinai is fundamental. I'm not fundamental. I'm going to see myself as relating to the fundamental truth of Sinai, and I consider myself as receiving Sinai, therefore joining to the fundamental existence revealed at Mount Sinai. Until this very day, the event at Mount Sinai retains its absolute clarity, but we erected a barrier that disallows us to relate to it. Between Mount Sinai and us, we place scorpions. We devote all our energy not to be receivers, not to receive that message. To a limit, we are prepared to receive. Today, the limit is generally between the ages of 2 and 3 years. A child will believe everything. The parent, they are just constantly receiving. Afterwards, none can tell us what to do. We know on our own. We know better. One who knows that their entire being is only as a receiver knows that to eliminate the power of receptivity is to eliminate our very existence. To summarize, Rav Moshe Shapiro took us on an extraordinary and intense journey, which I think will take quite a while to sink in. But just to summarize the journey that he took us on, he brought us in the Talmud to Mount Sinai with scorpions and white donkeys. And then he said, wait a second, what is Mount Sinai? Mount Sinai is something that we're told to remember, not to forget, to have a sense of absolute clarity related to Mount Sinai. Not only that, there are prohibitions, and there's a debate as to whether this idea to remember Mount Sinai is part of the 613 commandments or not, but according to Maimonides, it is. And then we talked about what it means to remember and to see with clarity. Don't allow it to leave our hearts. It has to be clear to us. What do you mean it has to be clear to us? How can it be clear if we never saw it? Because there's testimony from our parents, Maimonides said. Testimony from our parents. Of what value is testimony from our parents? And we saw the opinion of Ramban, Maimonides, in letter to Igeret Teman, that testimony from parent to child is actually what gives a child faith. And those who are unfaithful clearly don't have parentage, don't have lineage that goes all the way back to Sinai. And Rav Moshe Shapiro rejects that. He said, how is that possible? You could have people in the same family who, one faithful, one not faithful. You clearly can't connect the idea of faith and lineage in such a clear, unassailable way. And he said, no. The idea of the parenting and the teaching from generation to generation is replicating Mount Sinai. Is that every generation has a commandment, as in the principle of faith, to give an exact copy of that event, is to recreate the giving of the Torah. What was the giving of the Torah? It was the giving of the understanding of our essence, according to the Ramchal, of the essence that the Creator gives us the Torah, that God gave us the Torah, the essence of our existence, of understanding who we are in the world. And in order to do that, we have to stand at Sinai, we have to stand at the feet of the previous generations and be ready to receive that message, to say, it's not me who knows it all, but it's you who are teaching me. And that's the power of receptivity, according to Rav Moshe Shapiro, that every generation has from its parents. The power of standing there, and he uses the symbolism of the white donkey, of that upon which anything can be placed, and it will receive its form. It will accept it. The scorpion is the opposite of that. it rejects. So that was the journey he took us on, in saying we are part of this chain of tradition, but when we're going to think about it differently now. A chain of tradition is not just my grandparents told my parents who told me. It's that when my parents told me, when my teachers told me, I was experiencing it with the same clarity, in the same way, giving me the same fundamental understanding of why I'm here, of my existence, that the previous generations received from their parents. That's the clarity that we're supposed to have. Not to think about, imagine something that happened thousands of years ago, but to know that each of us are blessed to experience this in our own ways, in our own lives, of being taught as if we're standing at Sinai, at our own Sinai experience, which is when a parent teaches a child. And the question is, are we ready to hear it? Are we like those 2 and 3-year-olds who will say, okay, this is an understanding I'm going to incorporate into myself? Or are we like the know-it-alls who say, you can't teach me anything. I have all the wisdom I need. I'm going to figure it out for myself. So that is the journey that Rav Moshe Shapiro took us on in honor of Parsha Yitro, of understanding the revelation at Sinai. And I'll say as well, we're going to read the 10 Commandments this week. There's a lot of unclarity in terms of what the 10 Commandments are. In fact, if you look at Maimonides, if you look at other commentary, you know how many commandments they get from 10? I think Maimonides takes 15 commandments from 10.
14 or 15.
14 or 15 commandments. It's the 10 commandments. Calling it the 10 Commandments doesn't do justice to what it is, because it's much more complex than that. And what's the role of the 10 Commandments vis-a-vis the rest of the Torah, and so on. But in honor of that experience, of that event, we read it not as a historical event, but as a model for all future replicas of that event, which takes place every time we share Torah with each other. Any questions or comments after that intense journey?
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
should have been angels after that. I mean, we shouldn't have had the golden calf. We shouldn't have had anything. And that's it.
Yeah.
They
We
saw
should
the
have.
and that was
Yes, you're right. We have just as good as we are as remembering. We're even better at forgetting. So we'll that'll be future weeks. We're going to look at how we forgot so quickly, how we
we
slid
don't
so.
talk about DNA, right? No, okay.
I find the parallel to retelling the story of Passover also very interesting.
Yeah, look, Becky alluded to this before. Actually, there's an interesting debate amongst, well, it's Maimonides and others in terms of the version of that, the phrasing of every generation has to see themselves or has to demonstrate themselves as if they were. So do you see yourself as if, like, I learned about this story, I have to imagine it, or is it something that I have to reenact? And your experience at the Seder will determine, are we just telling a story, or am I actually a slave in this moment? Am I actually being redeemed in this moment? And that's exactly what you're referring to, right? That there are parallels there in this debate. Beautiful.
We have a living Torah, and
Mm.
we're living it in our generation, and that's what I'm getting from this. We're actually living every experience in every Parasha that we go from beginning to the end of the year, and then turn around and do it all over again. And if that can be conveyed to our children in some manner,
Mhm.
through our parents and our schools and our everything, then we're succeeding with our Jewish family.
Beautiful.
But it's very living. That's what
Yeah.
he's telling us, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this is a really important message, that Judaism is not about taking a faith that's a few thousand, that was given a few thousand years ago, and struggling to make it relevant. It's taking, the Torah was given today. It's going to be given again tomorrow. It's real. It's life. It's not history.
If we
think
could
that's-
only convey that to the ones that deny, or not, I shouldn't say deny, but question with negativity. I'd like to see them questioning and finding some answers somewhere from
Yeah.
people who could give it to them in a soft way.
Yeah, that's good. Many educational, pedagogical challenges ahead of us. Okay, for now we're gonna sign off here because we're a little bit over time. Thank you all for joining us on this very exciting journey, and we'll
Shabbat
see
shalom.
you next
What
week.
a journey.
Shabbat
What a
shalom.
journey you presented.
Yeah, thank you.